Imagine standing at the edge of a precipice, the wind howling around you, your crown heavy on your brow, your kingdom vast beneath your feet. Yet your greatest threat isn't an invading army or a scheming noble. It's the woman who shares your bed, your table, and your name. She is your queen, and in the shadowed corridors of medieval power, she may be the most dangerous person you know. If you've ever assumed that queens in the Middle Ages were mere ornaments, silent, obedient, and powerless, you're in for a revelation. The truth is far more complex, far more dangerous, and far more fascinating. Behind the veil of piety and submission, many medieval queens wielded influence that could topple thrones, ignite wars, and rewrite dynasties. Kings knew this, and that knowledge bred a quiet, gnawing fear, one they rarely admitted but always respected. By the end of this tale, you'll understand why a king might lock his door at night, not from assassins in the dark, but from the woman who bore his children and held his secrets. So lean in, the past is watching, and it has much to say. To understand why kings feared their wives, we must first understand what marriage meant in the medieval world. Far from a union of love or companionship, royal marriage was a political contract, a strategic alliance carved in flesh and blood. When a king married, he wasn't choosing a partner. He was forging a bond between kingdoms, securing military support, gaining access to trade routes, or legitimizing his rule through noble lineage. His wife was often a foreign princess, sent from another court with her own agenda, her own loyalties, and her own network of spies and allies. This dynamic created an immediate tension. The queen was both insider and outsider. She lived in the heart of the king's court, yet her primary allegiance might lie with her birth family, her father, her brothers, or her homeland. In an era before standing armies and centralized bureaucracies, personal relationships were the glue of governance. A queen's influence over her husband could shift the balance of power overnight. And if that influence turned against him, the consequences could be catastrophic. Consider the case of Eleanor of Aquitaine, perhaps the most formidable queen of the 12th century. Born in 1122, Eleanor inherited the vast and wealthy Duchy of Aquitaine at just 15, making her one of the most powerful heiresses in Europe. She first married Louis VII of France, becoming Queen of France. But when that marriage failed, partly due to political incompatibility, partly due to Louis's rigid piety, she didn't fade into obscurity. Instead, she annulled the marriage and, within weeks, wed Henry II of England, a man 12 years her junior but already a rising star in European politics. Now Queen of England, Eleanor bore Henry 8 children, including future kings Richard the Lionheart and John. But her role extended far beyond motherhood. She governed Aquitaine in Henry's name, commanded loyalty from its nobles, and acted as a de facto ruler of the south of France. When tensions flared between Henry and his sons, tensions Eleanor actively encouraged, she didn't hesitate to side with her children against her husband. In 1173, she helped orchestrate a massive rebellion involving her 3 eldest sons, backed by the kings of France and Scotland. Henry was furious and terrified. He couldn't simply execute her. She was too powerful, too beloved in Aquitaine, and too valuable as a symbol of legitimacy. Instead, he imprisoned her for 15 years. But even behind stone walls, Eleanor remained a threat. Her name alone could rally dissent. Her release years later would reshape English politics once more. Henry's fear wasn't paranoia, it was realism. His wife had the means, the motive, and the will to destroy him. Eleanor's story wasn't unique. Across medieval Europe, queens leveraged their unique position to exert influence that often surpassed that of male advisors. They controlled access to the king's ear, managed vast estates, distributed patronage, and shaped the upbringing of heirs. In a world where succession was everything, the queen's role as mother of the next king gave her unparalleled leverage. A king might rule by sword and decree, but if his son was raised to distrust him or worse, to hate him, his legacy was in jeopardy. This brings us to another critical source of royal fear: the queen's control over the royal nursery. In medieval courts, the upbringing of princes was not left to chance. From infancy, heirs were surrounded by tutors, chaplains, and nurses, many of whom were appointed by the queen. She decided which values they absorbed, which languages they spoke, and which nobles they befriended. A queen could subtly, or not so subtly, instill loyalty to her own family or faction, ensuring that when her son took the throne, he would continue her agenda, not necessarily his father's. Take Isabella of France, wife of Edward II of England. Edward's reign was marked by military failures, unpopular favorites, notably Piers Gaveston and Hugh Despenser, and growing discontent among the nobility. Isabella, initially a dutiful queen, grew increasingly alienated by her husband's reliance on these men and his apparent indifference to her. Sent to France in 1325 on a diplomatic mission, she refused to return. Instead, she formed an alliance with Roger Mortimer, an exiled English nobleman, and began plotting Edward's downfall. What made Isabella so dangerous wasn't just her political acumen. It was her status as mother of the heir, the future Edward III. She returned to England in 1326 with a small army, and the realm rallied to her cause. Why? Because she represented continuity. She wasn't seeking to usurp the throne for herself. She claimed to act on behalf of her son. This gave her rebellion a veneer of legitimacy that a mere baron's revolt could never achieve. Edward II was deposed, imprisoned, and likely murdered, possibly with a red-hot poker, though that gruesome detail remains debated. Isabella and Mortimer ruled as regents until Edward III, at just 14, staged his own coup and had Mortimer executed. Edward II's fear of Isabella wasn't just about losing power. It was about losing his son's loyalty, and in that, he failed utterly. His wife had turned the next king against him, using the very institution of motherhood as a weapon. But queens didn't always need to wait for their sons to grow up. Some acted directly, using the tools available to them: poison, rumor, and the subtle art of court intrigue. Poison, in particular, was a weapon of choice in an age when food and drink passed through many hands before reaching the king's table. While direct evidence is scarce, accusations of poisoning were often politically motivated. The fear was real. Chroniclers frequently whispered that a queen had slipped something into her husband's wine, especially if he died suddenly or under mysterious circumstances. One of the most infamous examples is Brunhilde of Austrasia, a Visigothic princess who married King Sigebert I of Austrasia in the 6th century. After Sigebert's murder, likely orchestrated by his rival brother's wife, Fredegund, Brunhilde became regent for her young son. Over the next 4 decades, she ruled with iron determination, surviving multiple coups, exiles, and betrayals. Her enemies accused her of every imaginable crime: witchcraft, adultery, even the murder of bishops. When she was finally captured by her great-nephew, King Clothar II, he had her tied to a horse and dragged to death. A brutal end for a woman who had defied the limits placed on her gender and station. Brunhilde's story illustrates a key truth. A queen who ruled in her own right, especially as a regent, was seen as unnatural, a violation of the divine order that placed men above women. Yet necessity often forced kings to rely on their wives in times of crisis. When a king went to war, fell ill, or died young, someone had to govern. And who better than the queen, educated, connected, and invested in the dynasty's survival? This paradox created deep anxiety. On one hand, kings needed their wives to be capable administrators. On the other, they feared what might happen if those wives grew too powerful or too independent. The solution for many monarchs was control: surveillance, isolation, or even imprisonment. But such measures often backfired, breeding resentment and pushing queens into the arms of rivals. Religion, too, played a double-edged role. The church preached female submission, citing St. Paul's injunction that wives should obey their husbands. Yet it also venerated powerful female saints and the Virgin Mary, whose purity and intercessory power made her a central figure in medieval devotion. Queens often modeled themselves after Mary: pious, merciful, and morally authoritative. This gave them a spiritual legitimacy that could challenge even a king's authority. If a queen claimed to act in accordance with God's will, who was the king to contradict her? Nowhere was this more evident than in the conflict between Henry II and Thomas Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury. Though Becket was the central figure, Henry's wife, Eleanor, played a crucial behind-the-scenes role. She supported Becket's stance against royal interference in church affairs, seeing it as a check on her husband's growing autocracy. When Becket was murdered in 1170, reportedly after Henry uttered the fateful words, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" Eleanor's sympathies lay with the martyred archbishop. Her influence helped turn public opinion against Henry, forcing him to perform a humiliating penance at Becket's tomb. Here we see another dimension of royal fear: the queen as moral arbiter. In an age when kings were judged not just by their power but by their piety, a queen's disapproval could erode a monarch's legitimacy. If she whispered to bishops, to foreign courts, or even to the common people that her husband was unjust or impious, those whispers could become roars. Moreover, queens often controlled vast networks of information. Through their ladies-in-waiting, confessors, and messengers, they gathered intelligence on court factions, military movements, and popular sentiment. A king might think he ruled alone, but his wife often knew more about his kingdom than he did. And knowledge, as they say, is power. Consider the marriage of Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile in 1469. Though this union occurred at the tail end of the medieval period, it exemplifies the ultimate expression of queenly power. Isabella wasn't just Ferdinand's wife. She was his co-ruler, an equal partner in the creation of modern Spain. Together, they completed the Reconquista, expelled the Jews and Muslims, and sponsored Columbus's voyage. But Isabella's authority was never subordinate. She issued decrees in her own name, commanded armies, and negotiated treaties. Ferdinand respected her, but he also knew better than to cross her. Their partnership was rare, but it underscores a vital point. When a queen possessed her own power base, land, troops, or a strong claim to rule in her own right, she ceased to be merely a consort and became a comonarch. And comonarchs, by definition, share power. For a king accustomed to absolute authority, that sharing could feel like a threat. Even in less dramatic cases, the daily reality of court life bred tension. A king's marriage was rarely private. Every meal, every conversation, every intimate moment could be observed, interpreted, and reported. A queen's sigh, a glance, a refusal to attend mass. These could all be read as signs of disfavor or conspiracy. In such an environment, trust was a luxury few kings could afford. And then there was the matter of succession. A king's greatest vulnerability was his lack of an heir, or worse, an heir of questionable legitimacy. Queens held the key to dynastic survival. But if a king suspected his wife of infidelity, the entire foundation of his rule could crumble. Bastard heirs were not just personal embarrassments. They were existential threats. A rival faction could claim the throne on behalf of a true heir, plunging the realm into civil war. This fear haunted Henry VIII of England centuries later, but its roots were deeply medieval. When Louis X of France died in 1316, his wife, Clementia of Hungary, was pregnant. The kingdom held its breath. If she gave birth to a son, he would be king. If not, the throne would pass to Louis's brother. When Clementia delivered a boy, John I, the infant was proclaimed king, but he died 5 days later, likely of natural causes. Yet rumors swirled. Had someone poisoned the child to clear the way for the uncle? The queen, grief-stricken and powerless, was sidelined. But the episode revealed how fragile royal succession could be, and how much depended on the queen's body. Even beyond childbirth, a queen's health was a matter of state concern. If she fell ill, the king might lose not just a wife but a crucial political ally, or face pressure to remarry, potentially upsetting delicate alliances. Conversely, if she lived too long and outlived her usefulness, she might become a liability, clinging to influence or wealth that the king wished to redistribute. All of this created a climate of mutual suspicion. Kings watched their wives. Wives watched their husbands. Both knew that love, if it existed at all, was secondary to power. And in that dance of dominance and dependence, fear was the constant companion. But perhaps the deepest source of fear was this. A queen could outlive her husband and shape the future from beyond the grave. Through her will, her patronage, her choice of burial place, and the education of her grandchildren, she could ensure that her vision of the realm endured. Kings, for all their might, were mortal. Queens, through their lineage, could achieve a kind of immortality. Take Blanche of Castile, mother of Louis IX of France, later St. Louis. When Louis's father, Louis VIII, died in 1226, Blanche became regent for her 12-year-old son. She faced rebellions from powerful French barons who saw a child king and a foreign-born queen as easy targets. But Blanche was relentless. She rallied loyal nobles, negotiated shrewd alliances, and even led troops in the field. When Louis came of age, he ruled as one of France's most revered monarchs. Deeply influenced by his mother's piety and political wisdom, Blanche remained his closest advisor until her death. Her legacy wasn't just a stable kingdom. It was a model of queenship that balanced strength with virtue. Louis IX never feared his mother, but his father, had he lived longer, might have. Because Blanche's competence was a reminder that power didn't reside solely in the crown. It resided in the mind, the will, and the womb of the queen. So why did medieval kings fear their wives? Not because they were monsters or schemers, though some certainly were, but because they were human beings with agency, intelligence, and ambition in a system that tried to deny them all three. The fear wasn't irrational. It was structural. In a world where legitimacy flowed through blood and marriage, the queen stood at the very heart of power. To ignore her was to invite disaster. To control her was nearly impossible. And to trust her completely, that was the riskiest move of all. The lesson echoes through history. Never underestimate the person who shares your bed. They know your weaknesses, your secrets, and your dreams. And in the right circumstances, they can turn any one of those into a weapon. Now look around your own world. Who holds the quiet power in your life? Who shapes decisions behind the scenes? History doesn't just teach us about the past. It reveals the hidden currents of the present. Pay attention, because the next great shift might already be unfolding. Whispered over dinner, planned in a glance, born from a bond you never thought to question.